It was 11 in the morning on a Tuesday. I wasn't supposed to be home. I stood in the backyard, staring at the detached studio my husband Brian had built. It was a pristine white box against the manicured green lawn. Except for the stain, a thick, dark red liquid was seeping out from under the heavy soundproof door, pooling slowly onto the gray concrete. My breath hitched. It looked exactly like blood. I screamed my daughter's name, Mia. But the expensive soundproofing Brian had insisted on. It swallowed my voice completely. The silence coming from inside that box was louder than a siren. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed a heavy landscaping rock from the garden bed, raised it over my head, and swung it with everything I had at the reinforced glass panel. Before we unlock this door and face what is inside, drop a comment telling me where you are watching from right now. I want to know who is brave enough to walk through this with me. The sound of shattering glass was the only satisfying thing that had happened all morning. I reached through the jagged hole, ignoring the slice against my forearm, and twisted the deadbolt from the inside. The door swung open, and immediately, I was hit by a wall of heat. It was stifling, heavy, and smelled sharp like turpentine and old chemicals. My eyes adjusted to the dim light. It wasn't blood, it was paint. Crimson acrylic paint, smeared across the floor, splashed against the white walls, and pooling near the threshold. In the corner, huddled like a frightened animal, was my 6-year-old daughter, Mia. She wasn't crying. She was past crying. She was curled into a tight ball, her knees pulled to her chest, her favorite dress stiff with drying red paint. Next to her lay 3 smashed glass jars and her iPad, screen black, battery dead. She looked up at me, her face streaked with sweat and red pigment, and didn't make a sound. She just trembled. I didn't collapse. A switch in my brain flipped from mother to protector. I stepped over the broken glass, the red liquid squelching under my heels, and scooped her up. She was boiling hot. Her skin felt clammy against my neck. Then I heard the gravel crunch behind me. "Jessica, what on earth are you doing?" I turned. Brian was standing at the gate, dragging his rolling suitcase behind him. He looked fresh, rested, and completely confused. He looked at the shattered glass of his studio door, then at me holding our terrified, paint-covered daughter, and his brow furrowed. Not in horror, in annoyance. "You broke the window," he said, his voice level. "You are letting the air conditioning out." I didn't answer. I didn't even blink. I walked past him, clutching Mia so tight her heartbeat thudded against my chest. He trotted after me, the wheels of his suitcase clattering on the pavement. "Jessica, stop. You are overreacting." She was having a tantrum. She threw the paint, not me. I put her in there for a timeout so she could calm down while I went to pick up the mail. I kept walking. The mail? He had a suitcase. He had been gone for 4 days. I entered the house and marched straight to the master bedroom. Placing Mia gently on the bed, I handed her a wet wipe to clean her face, and then I grabbed the duffel bag from the closet. My movements were precise, robotically efficient. 3 sets of clothes for Mia, my wallet, my passport, the charger, 2 water bottles. Brian stood in the doorway, leaning against the frame, arms crossed. He was still trying to manage the narrative. "She is fine, Jess. She just needs to learn boundaries. You coddle her. That is why she acts out. I leave her with the iPad, and she smashes my expensive supplies. Do you know how much that pigment costs?" I zipped the bag shut. The sound was sharp and final. Slinging it over my shoulder, I picked Mia up again. She buried her face in my shoulder, flinching when Brian took a step forward. "Where are you going?" he asked, his voice losing its confident edge. "We need to talk about the door. You can't just leave." I stopped inches from his face. I looked him in the eyes and saw nothing there, no remorse, no fear, just a calculation of how much this inconvenience was going to cost him. "Don't touch us," I said. My voice was a flat line. Maneuvering around him, I walked out the front door and buckled Mia into her car seat. I didn't look back at the house. I didn't look back at the man standing in the driveway, looking more concerned about his studio than his child. I put the car in reverse and backed out. My hands gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckle force, but I drove the speed limit. I needed to get to my sister-in-law Amanda's house. I needed a fortress. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that I was never walking back into that house again. Amanda's kitchen was quiet, the kind of stillness that felt safe, not suffocating. Mia was finally asleep in the guest room, scrubbed clean of the red paint, wrapped in a blanket that didn't smell like chemicals. I sat at the kitchen island, staring at my banking app on my phone. My hands weren't shaking anymore. They were steady. I was an architect. My entire life was built on analyzing structural integrity, finding the load-bearing walls, and calculating the breaking points. And as I looked at the transaction history, I realized I had been ignoring the cracks in my own foundation for years. $12,000. That was the check I had written 6 months ago. Brian had called it a necessity. He needed a creative space, a sanctuary where he could focus on his painting while still being home for the girls. He had sold me on the idea of a soundproof studio. He said he needed total acoustic isolation to get into his flow state. I had nodded, feeling that familiar pang of guilt the working mother's tax. I spent 60 hours a week designing high-rises in the city while Brian stayed home, packed lunches, and played the role of the doting, artistic father. Society loved him for it. I was the cold, distant provider. He was the warm, present parent. Or so the narrative went. I wrote that check because I wanted to buy his happiness. I wanted to buy my own freedom from guilt. I thought I was investing in his career. Now I knew I had simply paid for the construction of my daughter's prison. I scrolled back to the messages from 4 days ago. The setup for this weekend had been meticulous. Brian had insisted on taking our 12-year-old niece, Chloe, on a trip to the coast. He called it a portfolio shoot. Chloe wanted to be a model, and Brian, with his expensive camera gear, another $5,000 I had financed, volunteered to help her build her book. I had asked, why not take Mia? Why not make it a family trip? Brian's text was still there, glowing on the screen with sickening casualness. Mia is too difficult right now, Jess. She is going through a phase. She screams if she doesn't get her way. It will ruin Chloe's shoot. Besides, I need to focus on the lighting. Mia will be happier here with her iPad and snacks. It is just a few days. A few days. He had framed it as a break for everyone. A bonding trip for him and Chloe, a relaxing weekend for Mia, and a quiet work trip for me. I had agreed. I had thanked him. Lifting my gaze from the phone, I saw Amanda placing a mug of tea in front of me. She looked tired, her eyes red. She had her own scars from a bad marriage, which was why she hadn't asked a single question when I showed up on her doorstep. She just opened the door. He didn't leave her there by accident, I said, my voice low. Amanda sat down opposite me. What do you mean? He soundproofed that room, Amanda. He insisted on the highest grade of insulation. He told me it was to keep the world out. But today, when I screamed her name, I realized it was to keep her screams in. I looked back at the transaction log. The gas station charges on the coast, the expensive dinners for two. He was out there living the life of a patron of the arts with our niece, playing the cool, supportive uncle, while our 6-year-old was locked in a heat trap with a bag of crackers and a battery-operated babysitter that died after 4 hours. This wasn't negligence. Negligence is forgetting. Negligence is an accident. This was a system. He had designed this scenario with the same precision I used to design lobbies. He had calculated exactly how long the iPad would last, exactly how soundproof the walls were, and exactly how guilty I would feel if I questioned him. I closed the banking app and opened my notes. I didn't feel sad. I felt the cold, hard clarity of a demolition expert looking at a condemned building. I wasn't going to fix this. I was going to bring it all down. My phone vibrated against the granite countertop. It wasn't a call. It was a bombardment. A continuous stream of notifications that lit up the screen every 3 seconds. I didn't pick it up. I just watched the preview messages scroll by, analyzing them like data points on a failing structural report. You owe me an apology. That was safety glass, Jessica. Do you know how long it takes to order that? You are traumatizing her with your hysterics. She was in a timeout. She knows the rules. She broke the jars first. There it was. The pivot. In Brian's world, he wasn't the aggressor who locked a 6-year-old in a soundproof oven. He was the victim of an unruly child and a hysterical wife. He wasn't worried about Mia's dehydration or the terror she must have felt. He was worried about his overhead costs. He was furious that I had breached his perimeter. I slid the phone across the island to Amanda. She read the messages, her face paling. He isn't even asking if she is okay, she whispered. He doesn't care, I said, my voice steady. To him, Mia is just a defective employee who is messing up his workflow. Amanda looked down at her own hands. I need to call Chloe. I need to get her home. She has been acting different lately. Distant. She told me last week that I treat her like a baby, and that Uncle Brian is the only one who respects her intellect. The words hit me like a physical blow. Suddenly, the blueprint of our family life rearranged itself in my mind. I had always thought Brian just had a special bond with Chloe because they were both artistic. I thought he struggled with Mia because she was high energy, but it wasn't a personality clash. It was a strategy. It is called triangulation, I said. The term surfacing from a management seminar I had taken years ago. It is a control tactic. You divide the group to conquer them. I looked at the kitchen wall, but I was seeing the past 6 months play out in my head. I remembered a dinner party 3 weeks ago. Mia had spilled her juice. It was an accident, but Brian had sighed, loud and theatrical, and looked across the table at Chloe. He rolled his eyes at her, a conspiratorial look that said, "Can you believe we have to deal with this child?" Chloe had giggled, preening under his attention. He had elevated her to the status of a peer, a partner, while reducing Mia to a nuisance. He made Chloe feel special by making Mia feel worthless, I said, turning back to Amanda. He groomed Chloe to be his ally. He convinced her that she was mature, sophisticated, the cool one, and the price of admission to that club was joining him in looking down on Mia. That was why Mia never told me she was scared. She didn't think she had the right. Brian had spent months convincing her that she was the problem, that she was annoying, that she deserved to be put away in a box, and he had used our 12-year-old niece to reinforce it. He wasn't just a negligent father, Amanda. He was pitting them against each other. He isolated Mia with shame and isolated Chloe with flattery. Amanda grabbed her phone, her fingers trembling as she dialed Chloe's number. It went straight to voicemail. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Brian. Chloe agrees with me. She says Mia was being a brat all week before the trip. Don't make me bring her into this. I felt a cold rage settle in my stomach. He was using a child as a human shield. He was hiding behind a 12-year-old girl to justify his cruelty. I picked up my phone, but I didn't reply to him. I opened my contacts and scrolled to a name I hadn't called in years, a friend from my university days who now worked in digital forensics. I wasn't going to argue with Brian. I was done negotiating with a terrorist. I was going to audit him, and I was going to find every single receipt he thought he had deleted. I stopped crying. Crying is a biological release, and I didn't have the luxury of biology right now. I needed physics. I needed logic. Wiping my face with the back of my hand, I opened my laptop. I entered what I call architect mode. It is a state of mind where human emotion is suspended, and the world becomes a series of problems to be solved with geometry and hard data. I treated my marriage like a collapsing building. The first step in forensic architecture is not to guess. It is to document the debris field. I called Mark. We had gone to university together. He wasn't an architect. He was a data security consultant who specialized in corporate espionage. I didn't give him the sobbing wife story. I gave him the client brief. I need a full mirror of a cloud account, I told him, my voice crisp. I need location history, deleted caches, and metadata for every image uploaded in the last 96 hours. I will wire you a retainer of $5,000 right now. Don't ask me for permission forms. Just get me the data. Mark heard the ice in my tone. He didn't ask if I was okay. He just asked for the username. While Mark ran the extraction, I opened my own investigation. I logged into Brian's public Instagram account. His handle was The Artist Dad. It was a curated gallery of his supposed domestic sainthood. I scrolled to the posts from the last 4 days, the days he had been away at the coast with Chloe, leaving Mia locked in the studio. My stomach turned, but I forced my eyes to focus on the pixels, not the betrayal. There was a photo posted yesterday at 2 in the afternoon. It showed Mia and Chloe in our backyard, blowing bubbles. The caption read, "Afternoon magic with my favorite muses. Number blessed number girl dad." I stared at the image. To the outside world, it was proof of a happy, attentive father watching his children play. But I looked closer. I looked at the image the way I look at a site survey. The shadows were wrong. In the photo, the shadow of the oak tree was casting long across the grass to the west. That meant it was taken in the morning, not at 2 in the afternoon. I zoomed in on Mia's shoes. They were her old sneakers, the ones with the Velcro strap that had broken 2 weeks ago. We had thrown them out. Then I looked at the weather. In the photo, the sky was a piercing, cloudless blue. But yesterday it had rained. It had been overcast and miserable all day. My blood ran cold. He hadn't just snapped a picture and lied about the time. He had pre-scheduled it. I checked the next post. A picture of a home-cooked dinner, posted 2 days ago. Chef Brian back in the kitchen. But 2 days ago, he was already at the coast with Chloe. He had built a digital alibi. He had curated a content calendar of lies. He had spent hours selecting old photos, writing heartwarming captions, and scheduling them to auto-post while he was gone. He wanted the world to see a devoted father making dinner and playing in the garden, creating a smokescreen of normalcy so no one would wonder why he wasn't answering his phone. He had planned the neglect. He had automated the abuse. I took a screenshot of the weather report for yesterday and placed it next to his sunny photo of the happy children. It was undeniable proof. He wasn't an overwhelmed parent who made a mistake. He was a calculated architect of deception. My phone pinged. It was Mark. "I'm in. You are going to want to sit down for this, Jess." The cloud backup just finished syncing. The studio wasn't just for painting. I stared at the screen. The anger that had been fueling me shifted into something darker. Something lethal. "Send it to me," I said. "Send me everything." The file Mark sent was a compressed folder, a digital zip file that contained the unedited raw footage of my husband's life. I clicked, "Extract all." The progress bar moved agonizingly slow, a green line inching across the screen. When it finished, I opened the folder labeled Portfolio, Chloe. My breath caught in my throat. It stayed there, a hard lump of revulsion that I couldn't swallow. These weren't portfolio shots. They weren't professional headshots for a 12-year-old aspiring model. They were intimate, not explicit. He was too careful for that. Too calculated, but they were wrong. The lighting was moody, suggestive. He had posed her in ways that no uncle should pose his niece. There were close-ups of her lips, her neck, photos of her wearing heavy makeup, looking at the camera with a mature expression that he must have coached her into. I scrolled through hundreds of them. In every frame, I saw the grooming. I saw how he had manipulated her desire to be taken seriously as an adult. He had turned his camera lens into a weapon, stripping away her childhood frame by frame, capturing her not as a kid, but as a peer, a partner. It was a visual record of psychological theft. I felt sick. Physically, violently sick. But I forced myself to close that folder and open the next one. This one was labeled Studio, Smart Logs. Brian loved his tech. He had installed a smart lock on the studio door, one that tracked every entry and exit, synced to the cloud. I opened the spreadsheet for the last 4 days. The data told a story of torture. Tuesday, 4 p.m. Door locked. User, Brian. Tuesday, 8 p.m. Access attempt. Internal. Failed. Keypad. Disabled. Wednesday, 8 a.m. Access attempt. Internal. Failed. I scanned down the rows. The door hadn't opened. Not once. He hadn't put her in a timeout while he got the mail. The logs showed the door had been sealed for 18 consecutive hours before I arrived. The smart lock had a scheduled lockdown mode that he had activated before he left for the coast. He had programmed the door to stay shut. My hand flew to my mouth. 18 hours. I looked back at the photos of the crime scene I had taken on my phone. The smashed jars, the red paint everywhere. Suddenly, the image rearranged itself. It wasn't a tantrum. It was an S. O. S. Mia had been trapped. The iPad had died. The room was soundproof, airtight, and getting hotter by the minute. She had screamed for hours, but the insulation I paid for had swallowed her voice. She must have realized no one could hear her. She must have been dehydrated, terrified, and desperate. She didn't throw the paint to be naughty. She threw it at the glass because it was red. She was trying to make it look like blood. She was trying to create a visual signal so terrifying that someone, anyone, on the outside would stop. She was smart. My God. She was so smart. She used the only tool she had to save her own life. Brian hadn't built a studio. He had built a containment unit. He needed a place to store the annoying child so he could focus his attention on the compliant one. He had compartmentalized his abuse architecturally. I closed the laptop. The sound of the lid snapping shut echoed in Amanda's kitchen like a gunshot. This wasn't a divorce case anymore. I looked at the timestamps, the photos, the lock logs. This was a felony. I stood up. My legs felt heavy, but my spine was steel. I looked at Amanda, who was watching me with terrified eyes. "Get your coat," I said. "And call the police. Tell them to meet us at the house. We aren't just getting his things, we are coming for him." The driveway was lit by the flashing red and blue lights of 2 patrol cars. It was a chaotic scene, but as I stepped out of the car, I felt a strange, icy calm. I held my iPad against my chest like a shield. Beside me, my lawyer, whom I had called immediately after Mark sent the files, adjusted his suit jacket. Brian was standing on the front porch. He wasn't in handcuffs yet. He was leaning casually against the railing, chatting with a young officer. He looked the part of the beleaguered, reasonable husband dealing with a hysterical woman. He was using his gentle artist voice, soft, persuasive, utterly fraudulent. As I approached, Brian gestured toward me, offering a sad, sympathetic smile to the police. "Here she is. Officers. Look. I am sorry to waste your resources. My wife she is under a lot of stress at work. She had a panic episode earlier and broke a window. I am just worried about her mental state. I think she needs medical attention, not legal intervention." The young officer looked at me, checking for signs of the hysteria Brian had described. I offered him no reaction to feed on. I remained a void. I walked past Brian as if he were a ghost and approached the sergeant standing by the cruiser. "Officer," I said, my voice level and clear. "This is not a domestic dispute. This is a crime scene." Brian laughed, a nervous, incredulous sound. "Jessica, honey, stop. You are embarrassing yourself." It was a timeout. I handed the iPad to the sergeant. "I have digital evidence of child endangerment and unlawful imprisonment," I said, tapping the screen to open the spreadsheet. "These are the smart lock logs for the detached structure in the backyard. They show that the door was sealed from the outside for 18 consecutive hours. No exits, no food, no water." The sergeant took the tablet. He frowned, his eyes scanning the rows of red data. Brian stepped off the porch, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "That is a glitch. The Wi-Fi out there is spotty. The logs are wrong." I checked on her. I swiped the screen to the next tab. The folder labeled Portfolio. "And this," I continued, ignoring Brian completely, "is the cloud backup from his camera. These are photos of my 12-year-old niece, taken over the last 3 days across state lines." The sergeant looked at the first photo. Then the second. His posture changed instantly. The casual slouch vanished. His jaw tightened, and he looked up from the screen to Brian with a gaze that could strip paint. He didn't speak to Brian. He signaled to his partner. Brian saw the shift. The color drained from his face. The cool artist mask cracked, revealing the terrified predator beneath. Wait, you can't look at those. That is my private work. Those are artistic studies. She is a model. I was helping her build a portfolio. You don't understand the context. The sergeant handed the tablet back to me and unclipped the radio on his shoulder. Then he reached for his belt. Turn around, sir. Now. Brian stumbled back, hitting the railing. Jessica, tell them. Tell them I am a good dad. It is just art. I love them. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut was sharp and mechanical. It cut through the suburban night air, louder than any of his lies. Brian was still babbling, breathless and pathetic, trying to explain lighting angles and artistic vision as they shoved him toward the cruiser. He looked at me through the open window of the police car, his eyes wide and wet with tears. Jessica, please. It is art. I stepped closer to the window. I looked at him, really looked at him for the last time. It's not art, Brian, I said. It's evidence. I turned my back on him and walked toward my lawyer. The flashing lights painted the house in strokes of red and blue. But for the first time in years, the foundation felt solid. 6 months later, the ink on the divorce papers finally dried. It was the most expensive project I had ever managed, but the return on investment was priceless. The court ordered a full liquidation of Brian's assets. I sued for the return of my $12,000 investment in the studio, plus punitive damages for emotional distress and child endangerment. The settlement check was for $60,000. I put every cent of it into a trust fund for Mia and Chloe's therapy. He is currently awaiting trial. The artistic defense didn't hold up well against the hard data of the lock logs. It turns out, judges don't appreciate it when you treat children like inventory. I didn't move. I loved this house, and I refused to let him take it from me. But one thing had to change. Last Saturday, a flatbed truck pulled into the driveway carrying a yellow bulldozer. I didn't hire a contractor to supervise. I stood on the back porch with a cup of coffee in one hand and my daughter's hand in the other. Amanda and Chloe stood right beside us. Chloe looked different. She had scrubbed the heavy makeup off. She was wearing a hoodie and jeans, looking like the 12-year-old she was supposed to be. She is off social media now. She is back to drawing in sketchbooks that no one else is allowed to see. Mia squeezed my hand as the engine roared to life. She wasn't scared of the noise anymore. She knew who was in control of it. Watch this, baby, I whispered. The operator dropped the heavy steel bucket onto the roof of the white studio. The sound of wood splintering and glass shattering was jagged and loud. The white door, the one that had sealed her in, the one I had to smash through, buckled under the weight. It folded like wet cardboard. I watched the structure collapse. I watched the soundproofing insulation, that expensive foam meant to silence my daughter, tear apart in the wind. It took less than an hour to turn Brian's fortress of secrets into a pile of meaningless debris. When the truck hauled the last load away, all that was left was a patch of bare earth. The red stain was gone. The concrete was gone. This weekend, we are planting a garden there. Mia wants sunflowers. She says she wants something that is tall and loud and follows the light. I think that is a perfect design choice. I spent my career building skyscrapers, obsessing over steel beams and load-bearing walls. I thought safety came from structure. I was wrong. The strongest thing in this world isn't concrete. It isn't a smart lock. It is the gut feeling that wakes you up in the middle of a workday and tells you to go home. If you believe a mother's instinct is the most powerful force on earth, share this story, and if you ever see a red flag, don't paint over it. Smash the glass.